evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The working class forms the backbone of any society, including ours. But voices and rights are often ignored and sidelined. So tonight we're going to delve into the challenges and obstacles faced by workers in Malaysia and the urgent need for labour law reform to protect rights and welfare. So joining me on the show to discuss this further is Irene Xavier. She is the co-chairperson of the Labour Law Reform Coalition, which is a non-profit broad coalition of 58 Malaysian trade unions and worker organisations, all working to promote labour activism. Welcome to the show, Irene. It's so good of you to join me. I appreciate your time. I'm hoping, because it's such a big topic, we're going to start broad. Maybe you can set the scene for us and tell us about the current state of worker rights in Malaysia, the state of labour rights and worker protections in Malaysia right now. Where are we and where should we be?
Okay, I will have to say that we are actually at a very good point in labour rights history, because many of the laws that haven't been changed for years have started to change. Like the Employment Act has changed, the Industrial Relations Act has changed, and the next big giant that was waiting to be changed was the Trade Union Act, and which was passed by the first house, Dewan Rakyat, but it has not made it to the Dewan Negara, and actually we are not sure where it stands.
So what's the current status? We don't know whether this amendment is going to pass or not.
We don't know whether this amendment can be taken straight now to the Dewan Negara, or because there was a change of government, whether we have to go back to the Dewan Rakyat.
Okay.
So this we are not sure of. So yeah, we are at that point.
So what have the laws that have been amended, and what is this trade unions amendment bill meant to do? So you say we're in a good state right now. In what way has things changed and improved?
I mean, the Industrial Relations Act has changed, but in terms of trade union, it has to work together with the Trade Union Act.
Okay.
So the amendments were positive, but the amendments haven't gone through the whole process of becoming law. And so in a way, we can say that labour law has come quite far, but not far enough.
Okay, far but not far enough. When you say that the amendments were positive, can you give me an example of how they were positive?
They were positive in the sense that they gave workers many rights in the Industrial Relations Act. But if you are a trade union, there are many things that you cannot do, because the laws are so rigid about trade unions, the current laws, unless they are passed. Now, if the Trade Union Act is amended, it means that workers have a right to form workers of their choice.
A union of their choice.
Yes,
okay.
I mean a union of their choice, which they can't do now. Now, if there's a national union, you decide whether you want to join the union or not. If you are the only way in which you can form a union is you form an in-house union, and in-house unions are small and very easily manipulated by the employers.
Okay, so I want to zoom out and ask about unions. I think many of us are unaware of the role of a trade union, a role of a union, what it does, what benefits it may bring, and why we don't know much about it. Actually, there's a huge gap in our education about labour rights. Why do we need unions?
Yeah. Basically, a union is just an organization that allows a group of persons to negotiate with their employers. That is very basic about trade unions. But Malaysia, we went through the Cold War during the communist, so-called anti-communist, communist era, and therefore Malaysian law was so afraid that trade unions will be controlled by communists and communist type of elements. So they made it very difficult for workers to form a union of their choice. So what happened is the unions were formed long ago by people specially chosen by the government to form the unions. They brought in a trade union advisor from Britain, and this person will say, okay, this union goes, that union no, and so on. And so most of the unions were shut down, and then they began the national unions. And all national unions had this fear that they can be shut down, that the government can watch them, and so on. So unions in Malaysia had this sword over their head. And so they were very careful. They were not allowed to form unions of their choice. So whatever union is there, you stick with it. If not, you form an in-house union, which doesn't go very far.
What is it like in other comparable countries, Irene? Are there lots of unions? Are workers all part of unions? Is there collective bargaining between the employee and the employer? What is it like in a country that has a thriving collective action, union landscape?
I think a good example would be Indonesia.
Indonesia, so close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Indonesian laws were much worse even than Malaysia before. And with the fall of Suharto, the laws changed. So now in Indonesia, you can actually form unions. So many people argue that from one end you went to the extreme of the other end. So people started forming unions, small, tiny unions all the time.
So many, okay.
Yeah, but now the situation is coming back to normal because we know that when you have too many unions and your union is small, you don't have much bargaining power.
Okay.
So it is naturally now going back to a better
so
process.
they've just kind of consolidated.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I see. So what is it then like in Malaysia? Because we have these laws that maybe for decades of repressive action on unions, what then needs to change? I'm just thinking, what are some of the specific labor reforms that you think might benefit the Malaysian worker in the contemporary age?
I think the first thing that will have to change is the Trade Union Act. And because many of the old unions are so used to a regulated situation, they are a bit fearful. Suddenly, if there's so much freedom, then people will leave their unions. So they're afraid of this, which I think is natural. But I think workers in the end will have to choose, will have to decide, and you have to make the situation available for them to make choices, which is not the case now in Malaysia.
Could you elaborate what you mean by the choices? So how do unions differentiate from one another? Why is one national union not enough? Why do we need more than one?
See, for example, if I belong to a certain union, I'm not going to mention any names, but it goes on record in Malaysia that some of the oldest union, one of the oldest union in the country, has given throughout the lifetime of a worker for many generations now, they were earning about the lowest wages in the country. That is because they are not allowed to form another union. So they have to take it or leave it. You don't have a union, or if you have a union, you just have this. Now this is being supported by local workers because their argument is local workers don't want the job. Local workers don't want the job because it pays too little. It is so isolated. So therefore, they brought in huge numbers of migrant workers.
Foreign workers, okay.
And migrant workers are not thinking about unions. They are afraid that if I join the union, I'll be chucked out of my job. So it gives them a very difficult choice. What do I decide? There are unions, for example, the electronics union. For a long time, they were not allowed to form a union. They just did not allow them. And it was only in the 1990s that they were allowed to form unions, but they said no national union. So, which means they said then we will have regional unions. So you have electronics union, northern region, electronics union, central, western region, electronics union, eastern region. So they tried to make the unions smaller.
Very fragmented,
yes.
Right? Okay, so that breaks down the bargaining
yes.
power.
So that is what has happened. So now work in an electronics factory is not the best in terms of they just employ a lot of migrant workers to do very menial tasks, repetitive tasks. You keep on just doing the same thing over and over again. And so within the industry, there is very little progress for the worker.
Right.
The only progress would be for the product. So if a television is been upgraded, television technology is upgraded, then they upgrade the production. But there's no upgrade of the worker. So that is the situation. And the obstacle to that is the Trade Union Act.
Okay. How do you see, with hopes that the Trade Union Amendment Bill gets passed, how do you see that changing or shaping the nature of work in Malaysia? What might change? And in a future where the amendment might have passed, how might it be different?
If the amendment was passed, then unions do not have to walk on tiptoe all the time. They can then really talk about what they can do as a collective for the workers. Then it will encourage a lot of discussion. A lazy trade union leader will be chucked out soon enough. When people find out that he's lazy, he's not doing anything, or that he's taking money, or that kind of thing. So the workers then become
empowered.
Empowered to decide, we don't want this leader, we'll have another leader. That kind of thing. So they are actually part of the process that decides a major part of their life, because work life is almost 3/4 of your life is work life.
That's right. I'm just thinking about worker rights and worker protection, and I'm wondering about the intersection between class and race and gender even. Do you see there being are there intersectionalities that we need to pay attention to?
Yeah. For example, women are at the bottom rung of Malaysian employment. The lowest paid workers, the mass of women workers are at the lowest end. They have the migrant workers. If they are not prepared to continue working at such cheap rates, then chuck them out and let's take the migrant workers. That kind of thing is happening for everyone in the country. We talk so much about Malaysia being a developed country and so on, but we don't have the skills to be a developed country. We are not training people how to work better, how to earn better, how not to fill up your whole life with work. That's the only way in which you can go on. And for this, you have the trade union.
Okay, all right, I see that. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back in just a couple minutes and continue this conversation with Irene Xavier. Stay tuned to Consider This. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. I'm chatting tonight to Irene Xavier. She's the co-chairperson of the Labour Law Reform Coalition. We're talking about labour rights, worker protection, labour activism, and in talking about that, I wanted to ask you about the strength of the business lobby in Malaysia. We've talked about how unions have been weakened over decades of legislation and regulation, but is the business lobby on the opposite side strong and therefore making it less conducive for workers to fight for collective bargaining power?
Yeah, Malaysia is in a very unique situation. We want to become developed. We want to live like Australian workers or British workers and so on. But the business lobby is somehow strong. It's very, very strong. And therefore they say, if you're not prepared to pay, let's say the minimum wage. Let's just say it is going up, let's say. And now it's at 1,500. Many people don't even want to pay 1,500.
Well, it was deferred so many times, wasn't it, from its implementation date?
So it's just that the employers think, no, I will still want to take the third world kind of thinking. I want to get workers who are prepared to earn less than 1,500. And where will they go? Then they go to undocumented migrant workers. So there are a lot of backdoor ways in which an employer can try to reduce his labor cost. But what they do not see is that when you stop thinking about that and you think about production costs, you think about improving your product in such a way, and you make the workers participate in improving the product by paying them well, many things will change. But employers don't think that way. It's a very lazy thinking. Okay, let's pay low wages. Whoever wants a job, take it or leave it.
Well, the rationale that has often been used to justify changes like increase in minimum wage has been that Malaysia is the SMEs are the backbone of the Malaysian economy. This will hurt SMEs, therefore will hurt the Malaysian economy. That the mom and pop shops will suffer from an increase in increasing the minimum wage, for instance. How do we ensure that worker rights and protections are upheld, but also supporting maybe smaller businesses?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of things that we can learn. For example, small businesses, let's say in Japan, they depend on fewer workers because you have to pay the higher minimum wage. But they survive. They're clean. They run as quite well. They run. If you go to a small restaurant or something, the restaurant is not big. You get good food. You get good service. Well, it is time for us to think that way as well. To reduce costs, stop looking at labor only to reduce costs. There are so many other factors in the production. You reduce costs in other areas. But if you're a lazy employer, you just have a machine and you want to use the machine for as long as you like, that machine destroys the fingers of your workers or something, you don't care. I think we have to stop thinking like that. We have to rethink everything about production in the country. And then we will look for other more effective ways to reduce production costs and not just be stuck on low wages.
In your experience, your decades of experience, your career as a labour activist, Irene, have you encountered the business lobby? Have they been, how have you countered their reaction to your work?
Like, for example, the electronics union is a good case in point. The employees just refuse to have a union. And because of the global pressure on unions to make progress, to keep up to international standards. They had to give a union. And so that's why they said no national union, regional union. Yeah, we have to stop thinking like that. If we can think of other ways in which we can make workers' lives better. For example, I remember this many years ago in one electronics company, I won't mention them, they have a competition for the workers of how you can improve your work. And the workers, they get very involved in this because they know their work very well. So they came up with ways in which they can improve their workplace. But just workers, ordinary workers with the Form 3 education, maybe Form 5, who came up with this kind of things. This is what we are not looking at all. Your workers need not always be your enemy in terms of profits. Workers can be participant in making your company grow.
Can both be on the same side, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's interesting because, after decades of anti-union efforts in Malaysia, I think there's a lot of us who really don't know the role of trade unions, the benefit, the importance, and there's also a certain kind of taboo or mindset that comes with talking about trade unions or worker associations. What can you tell me about the need for education? How do we make the public, the working class of Malaysia, better aware of worker rights?
Yeah, because this is not touched upon any time in school. So
in school?
Yes.
Oh, you think it should be as early as in school?
Yeah.
Okay.
So because we study everything in school, so many things. But trade unions are not really mentioned in school. Rights of people are not mentioned in school. I think all of this has to change.
But the mindset of currently the society. I mean, let's use a couple of examples. Whenever there's talk about doctor strike, for instance, contract doctors going on strike, or any type of that kind of action, it's almost always seen as a negative, right? Any kind of industrial action feels negative. Should it be viewed in a negative lens, through a negative lens?
Yeah, because this whole lack of rights of workers has now come up to the level of doctors. So they are thinking how to reduce the cost of doctors, so they have contract doctors. Now the doctors, because they are more educated and so on, they also have choices. They leave this country and go to another country. So they have retaliated. Now this, I think, is a good example of what this anti-union propaganda, anti-union actions in the country, the level in which it has brought Malaysia. It has brought Malaysia to the level that a doctor doesn't feel that he should work in this country. If he has a choice, he'll go to another country. So you spend so much investing in this person to be a doctor, trained. It's not cheap. And then he's waiting to get out of the country. So I think we have to strike a balance somewhere.
Okay, Irene, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. You've given me a lot to think about, and I think a lot for our viewers to digest today. Thank you for your time. Appreciate your insights.
Welcome.
That was my conversation with Irene Xavier, co-chairperson of the Labour Law Reform Coalition. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.